This here is your viewport, where all of your work takes place. Each viewport is assigned to a particular camera. Up here, you can find the different shelves for different jobs in Maya. You have your knobs and polygon shapes occupying the first two shelves. I normally use the poly shapes as they have subdivisions that you can tweak. We even use the sculpting, rigging and animation shelves in this course, so you can go ahead and learn more about them on your own if you want. Under the rendering tab, you have the default Maya rendering assets like your lights, your cameras, and your Maya materials. I normally don't use any of that because I use Vray assets instead, but I kind of like Maya's directional lights, so I sometimes use them in place of the Vray sun. The Bifrost tab gives you access to tools that you can use to create fluid effects like running water or smoke. Mash is a procedural particle generator. You can use it to simulate rain or create grass. I don't really use Mash that much because frankly I don't know how to use it. XGen is an instancing software. It can be used to create large fields of grass or an entire forest without worrying about burning up your machine. The instances are like copies, but they don't carry all the information of the original, so they are not as heavy. Think of the instances as Kagibunjins. Finally, we come to the shelf we'll most likely be using 90% of the time, the Vray shelf. Here we have all our Vray rendering assets like lights, materials, fair, volume grids and so on. We'll become well acquainted with this shelf by the end of this course. Let's move on to our workspace. Head over to the poly modeling shelf and create a cube so we can better understand how the workspace behaves. On the bottom left corner, you'll see the axes Maya works in and their corresponding colors and directions. Maya is a 3D software, so it has 3 axes, X, Y and Z. These may seem familiar to you if you are coming from SketchUp. The X and Z axis deal with movement on the ground plane, while the Y axis deals with height movements. On the right hand side is the channel box. If I select the cube, you see that the channel box displays the different properties of the cube, including its position in relation to the origin. Editing any of the values in the channel box directly affects the cube. Let's go ahead and test this by inputting 2 into each of the translation values, and we see the cube move as a result. The channel box also allows you to edit objects of the same type all at once. Let's duplicate the cube by selecting it and holding down Ctrl D on the keyboard. Translate the duplicate by 2 on the y-axis. Click and drag to select both cubes and rotate by 30 on the z-axis, and we see that both cubes rotate at the same time. This is great for when you have tons of objects like lights in a scene and you don't want to waste time individually changing their intensities. Clicking the third icon on the top right corner gives you access to the attribute editor, which in turn gives you access to more properties than the channel box. Here you get access to shape, mesh, material information and so much more. Maya is a node-based software, so each asset you create has nodes that connect it to a different asset. The attribute editor is a quick way to navigate between those nodes without opening the graph editor. Our cube, for instance, is connected to the Lambert shader node, which is just a fancy way of saying it has Lambert 1 material applied. Shader nodes become more and more complex as you add more details to your materials, but we'll go more into that in the next lesson. On the right hand side of our viewport, we have our toolbox. This contains our selection and navigation tools, and right below that we have the panel editors and the outliner. The lowest icon is the outliner. This opens up a list of all the objects in your file and is very good for organization. Already we can see that both cubes are listed here, as well as all our cameras. If we were to create a Vray sphere light from the Vray shelf, we'll see that the created light pops up in the outliner. We can dock the outliner to the right hand side of the viewport so that we can access it anytime we need it. Above the outliner icon, we have the viewport panel editors. By default, Maya has a single panel configuration. You can switch between single panel, 4 panels and 2 panels by clicking on these icons. You can also press the spacebar to switch between them. Say we have our single panel option enabled. Hitting the spacebar will send us to the 4 panel screen. Then we can click on any of the windows and hit spacebar again to zoom into that window. You can also change the display camera of the panel by heading to Panels and selecting a preferred view. This layout is very good for when, let's say, you want to edit something in a plan, but you also want to see how it affects the perspective at the same time. Beneath the viewports, we have the time slider and the range slider, which are normally used for animation. And below that is the command line, where you can input your code. You can switch between the MEL and Python languages if you click here. And if you click the icon beside the command line, you open up the script editor, where you can view a history of all the commands you have issued.